Right. Hello, everyone. Let's make a start. A big warm welcome to all of you as we kick off our panel discussion on World Mental Health Day. Thank you so much for joining from wherever you are. We have got a fantastic panelist today here with us, and I'm so thrilled to have the honor to be, speaking with Chris and Winston, who will be introducing themselves in a minute. And I just thought I would just give a quick rundown of what we've got in store for you today. There will be a brief introduction, like I said, from our lovely panelists, and then we'll have a 45-minute deep dive into a wealth of knowledge on various aspects of mental health as a human right and how to make work for our well-being. And then in the last 15 minutes of today's webinar, we'll be taking your questions. So feel free to start thinking about what you would like to ask our experts, and then we'll pick some at the end and hopefully have enough time to address as many as possible. So obviously World Mental Health Day, it's usually celebrated on the 10th of October, and it's a global opportunity to talk openly about mental health and let everybody know that it's okay to seek help when we're facing challenges. And it's a very special day that kind of reminds us all that mental well-being is something every single person deserves, no matter who they are or where they come from. And it's something that we all have because we're all human. And this year's theme is mental health is a universal human right. And it very much shines a light on kind of the importance of ensuring that mental health support is accessible to all without discrimination. And World Mental Health Day also encourages a lot of conversations, compassion, and that collective approach in taking actions towards a more mentally healthy and inclusive society. So it is a reminder that we can together make a positive difference in the lives of individuals and communities around the world. So just briefly about myself, mental health is very close to my heart. So this day is very special. And I feel like even beyond this day, these conversations are very important. The reason also why I studied psychology all the way through to my PhD, like that long way all the way through, is probably my motivation, my passion for the subject matter. So I'm truly passionate about the power of positive psychology in particular and how it can make a difference in people's lives. And my journey is all about kind of spreading positivity and nurturing emotional well-being and helping individuals grow, especially in a world where mental health concerns are becoming increasingly prevalent. And I really believe that knowledge and understanding are the keys to empowerment when it comes to mental health. And it's not just about talking, but it's about taking action. So we need to raise awareness. We need to have these kind of conversation and talk about applying more effective strategies. So we are on a mission here, and I'm so excited. Although my kind of path to all of this wasn't it was a bit unconventional. I used to be a senior lecturer in higher education, but I realized I wanted to make more direct impact on individuals' lives. So that's why I founded Positive Psychology for Life. And then I joined the incredible team at Unmind, where we place mental health and well-being at the core of everything we do, really. And we also, with me today, have Winston. Would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, hey everyone, my name is Winston Clements, and I guess by profession, I am a speaker and content creator with a mission to help individuals and companies create cultures that are truly inclusive. And I guess on a personal note, I have lived experience with disability and how mental health impacts the life of even someone who has a physical disability. And so that's why this is such a passion topic for me. And that's why I'm so excited that we're diving into this conversation today.
Thanks, Winston. So glad to have you here. And Chris, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with this amazing set of panelists and all of you. My background is in public health, and I've done a lot of work in my past lives, my current life around like systems design, health communications, and capacity building. I currently work at a law firm. So I have to give a quick disclaimer that all of my thoughts and opinions are my own and not that of Covington and Burling. Thank you for listening. So yes, I'm the director of Covington, and I'm director of well-being for Covington and Burling. And the work that I do there is really interesting because I kind of operate as an insider-outsider, which I think of as like acting as an in-house consultant on well-being and thinking about how to culturally move the framework around well-being, both inside, but also within the industry themselves. It's also really cool to see a lot of my industry movers on the call today. Hey, y'all. And so I work with lawyers, and with that, my work has to be really concrete. And we use a lot of qualitative and quantitative data to identify like intrinsic and extrinsic barriers to well-being, which is like really fun, but also very taxing. And so a big part of my role is helping to increase capacity for community involvement, to fostering communities of care that support well-being and mental health, while also providing assistance and thinking about how do we communicate better. So that's what I do both at Covington and beyond. And I also help people think about what kind of speakers can we bring to organizations that really have health promotion backgrounds. So that's about me.
Wow. It's amazing. It's an honor to be here with both of you. And thank you so much for your time today. And before we kind of get into it, I thought it would be really nice to hear from the audience. I've seen different things coming through. I think shout outs for Margarita Tuesday as well. So here it is. And before we kind of get into it, it would be lovely to hear from the audience what it actually means to you guys. What does mental health as a human right mean to you? So feel free to just drop your thoughts into the chat, and we'll kind of pick on some. Don't worry, not to like speak up or anything, but just, you know, we'll obviously try to read some out. And in the meantime, it'd be lovely to hear maybe Winston, if you like to just say what it means to you, or Chris, if you want to say something towards that. But yeah, just thank you so much. Our facilitator put it in the chat as well. So people are starting to say nice things, so we can kind of interact a little bit with the audience before we get into our panel discussion. I love that, being safe to be myself. That is very wholesome. Yeah. Holistic well-being. That everyone should have the space and time to think about and work on their own well-being. Absolutely. Recognizing that different populations are facing different specific stresses. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot around safety, psychological. It's so true. It starts all there, doesn't it? Its ability to perceive and handle the world and your own experiences. Yeah. Thank you so much. That's so good. Like, so true. I mean, I think one of the things that really stood out to me is here somebody talking about, you know, the differences and, you know, how subjective it can be as well. And I guess it would be a wonderful starting point. And I would love to ask you, Winston, actually, and addressing kind of accessibility in the workplace, because that's a big factor, of course, as well, when it comes to mental health. And would you mind sharing some of your experiences and how that maybe has been addressed or not addressed?
Yeah. So many ideas come to mind, and I guess maybe important to say that prior to entering the work that I do now as a speaker in the DEI space, I had a completely different career before that, working in technology, working in software. And a big part of that job was actually traveling to different places, different client sites, and working with companies there to deliver IT projects. And I guess when it comes to accessibility, one of the things that kind of pops into my mind from that time, because I have a physical disability, like I mentioned, even things like, you know, traveling with a wheelchair was particularly tricky, because not knowing where you're going to be working and how you are going to get there, you know, what is the transportation going to be like? What is the building going to be like in terms of physical access? And I guess even moving beyond physical access, thinking about, you know, working with different teams all the time as someone who is coming from, I guess, a underrepresented community, and all the emotions that come with that. Am I going to fit in? You know, I'm completely having to rebuild my relationships from scratch. So all of those types of things were things that kind of weighed on me as I worked in that career. And so I guess I've taken some of that pain and kind of turned it to purpose in the work that I do now, with supporting companies to create these, you know, whether it's communities, and I've seen a lot of comments there about safe spaces and, you know, psychological safety, where people can come forward and just be, or also just come forward and maybe disclose something that they need in a way that feels good to them. So with some of the companies that I've worked with, disclosure could look like, getting together and having conversations and hearing people's stories. But it could also look like companies that built a IT system that allowed people to input specific needs that they might have, whether that's, accommodation or transport arrangements or flexible working. And that way it kind of creates room for that need to be met, as opposed to not having that system in place.
That's a massive thing, isn't it? Thanks so much for sharing. I mean, it's added pressure around it as well, isn't it? So on top of, everything that everybody has to kind of go through and everything, it's that, like you were talking about, the added emotions, the added anxiety of, how will it be? Will there be, any kind of provisions made for you? And it all talks to that psychological safety. Absolutely. I feel like it's such an important subject. And I feel, for me personally, I would also say it starts there, doesn't it, with organizations, from accessibility to other things as well, that you can only start when your culture has a psychological safe environment where you can feel like you can speak up about your needs more, or without the fear of getting kind of resistant or reprisal. So it really enhances the collaboration, the trust, and everything that you need to feel safe in that environment to express yourself. Chris, did you want to say something to that?
I was thinking about what Winston was saying, just all the different practical approaches to thinking about equity, which I think is the core idea here around mental health as a human right. For the context of this conversation, as you mentioned earlier, Kathy, that everyone has mental health. We know that. But what everyone doesn't have is access to mental health care, or knowledge about the resources afforded to them, or freedom from the stigma or biased or limited thinking that often exists when it comes to mental health. And when I think about my specific lens, which is the workplace, I kind of think about how the workplace embodies that mental health is a human right if it is done well, if you think about people as individuals, and also that there are ways that we can build and design around the human experiences, both organizationally, and the physical structure, and the ways that policies are designed, and also the ways that teams are put together and formed. And so I think about inclusion, belonging, and community care as the center of the ways that we work, and the way that we can create psychologically safe environments that can support the individual's well-being. And I think that's kind of what Winston was talking about. So I really resonated with that. I also think a lot about when you have all of these different individual supports that you're providing, how are you communicating them so that people know how to find them, that all of our leaders can talk about them with ease, like taking that human right approach down to like the actual way that we think about mental health and the way that we are doing it, and thinking about upward mobility and how we make judgments or decisions about who is fit to lead, or how to manage bigger responsibilities. And conversely, I also think about language that perpetrates stigma or substantiates that someone isn't quite right for the job or the environment. And so if you're really thinking about mental health as a human right, you're thinking about what you're doing, you're thinking about your actions, you're thinking about how you relate to people, and how your policies reflect all of those different things. So that's what I've been thinking about.
Yeah, and that's quite loaded, right? Like you can see, like, some organizations will be like, let's just shy away from all of that. It's just too much. But actually, it's about where to start. And would you, from your experience as well, Chris, I'd be really interested. Do you think, are there any specific thoughts on tips having around accessibility, for example, in the workplace? What can organizations do? Where do they start?
I mean, where do you start really depends on your organization. Every single one will be different. But I think that at its core, you start at focusing on what does it mean to design a human-centered workplace? What does it mean to provide accessibility beyond an accommodation? And I think, Winston, you were talking a little bit about traveling. So if you have roles in your organization where people are traveling, like, do your policies reflect accommodations and benefits that support having a person travel back and forth and making it easier for them either physically or emotionally or socially? And is there a way for them to communicate those needs so that you can provide an accommodation for them so that they can have an easier time to do their work? Because I think we think about mental health as this very like heady thing, when a lot of things that affect our mental health is also just everyday experiences that we have that can compile, right? And we'll talk about burnout, I'm sure, at some point, but like, are your policies designed to save $1 on the front end or and pay premium chronic, premiums on the back end? Or are you thinking about designing for the individual? So that's one of my answers for accommodations and accessibility, but also like just creating supportive environments and thinking about universal design. I forget where I heard this once, but a lot of the work that I do is designing for the margins, designing for the historically marginalized. And so when you design for the margins, everyone then becomes included. So if you think about how far is the restrooms from where people are, like, is it easy to get to for someone who isn't able-bodied? Then it'll automatically be easier for people who are. And that's just like a really easy example. So just thinking beyond how do you make this place just work for everybody, but thinking about how we can make it work for people that struggle or have just a different experience than you might. And I think you bring those people to the table, and that's how you make an accessible location. That's how you make an accessible firm, organization, and bring people together in a new way. So it creates a supportive environment.
Yeah. That's brilliant. So well said. I really can agree more. And it is exactly those little things. And I think especially it really touches on belonging as well, right? Like you then feel like you are a part of someone, because people don't shy away. They don't feel awkward. They don't feel uncomfortable, because now they know that things are in place as well to support you. And it's just, it's a different place where it's actually a no-brainer. I agree with you. And I think you touched on something really important when you talked about it's all of these little things that actually come together, and those become, psychologically, we will talk about chronic stress, right? So you have these, I don't know, commute to work, or accessibility, lack of accessibility at workplaces, or other, biases, other things that are not accommodated for in the workplace. And those things are all these niggling bits that will add up, and they can actually turn into chronic stresses over a longer period of time, which then, of course, and I'm glad you mentioned that as well, it kind of leads to, if it's not being intervened with, if you're not preventing it, and the chronic stresses just keep on coming and there's nothing happening, no intervention, then eventually the last straw is burnout. Okay, so, and we see it, we see it all over the media when we look at research papers, the rising rates of burnout and mental health problems in the workplace, especially. They really might suggest that for some organizations, pursuing these achievement and results and prioritizing employee well-being are mutually exclusive things, right? But actually, it might appear this way, but it's very possible to actually strike a balance here between achieving organizational goals and prioritizing employee well-being. And I think that's a point. Actually costs them less as well in the long run. When we talk about absenteeism, presenteeism, all of these things, it's something that we can really, if organizations understand it and try and get that balance better, in fact, then we can have that supportive environment for everybody as an employer, really give that to employees, and then they're so much more able to have a better work-life balance, reduce the noise on these chronic stresses as well. And those then might just be, acute stresses that you can deal with better. So, and maybe it's just important for the audience as well. Sometimes it's easy to forget as a psychologist, but burnout also doesn't mean, a lot of people, we throw it around a lot, the word burnout and stress. We always talk about it in a very dismissive way sometimes as well. And actually, it's quite important to acknowledge that when we talk about burnout, in a nutshell, really, it does mean it's a presence of very intensified stress, but it has to be these three factors of emotional exhaustion, disengaging or cynicism, when you're just completely detaching yourself, and then also being unproductive or inefficiency, right, in some ways. And it's not just one of them. So if you're emotionally exhausted, then you might very likely be quite stressed, right, and need to refuel. But that doesn't mean you're burned out. It's actually, you have to have these three elements present. So emotional exhaustion, disengaging, and unproductivity. And managers need to be equipped with the tools that they will need to establish this safe environment for individuals, right? Where individuals can have open conversations so that concerns and difficulties can be addressed at the right time, and early enough, or when things are out of hand, like how you can intervene as well. I think that's really, really important. Winston, do you have, oh yeah, sorry, go on, Chris.
Oh no, I was just going to add to what you were saying, that
sure.
When I think about burnout, I like to think about Emily and Amelia Nagoski's definition, and they talk about when demand exceeds the resources available to manage those demands. And I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier about accommodations and about resources that are available to support mental health. A big piece of the work that I do, both at Covington and beyond, is helping people learn to communicate about those resources and about the accommodations, because more often than not, when I talk to people, employees, or, just folks in the community, they don't know what's available to them. They don't know that they can ask for an accommodation, for a chair, or for something to make their work life a little bit easier, right? So it's about learning to communicate those things, and also for organizations to really analyze what is being asked within certain roles, within certain teams, and providing the resources to match that as much as possible. And that's not always going to be the case that they can do that, but also recognizing that when it can't be done, that there's also an opportunity to provide, I don't know how to put it, but like, if you can't meet the resources for a team, you're also providing additional supports for them in other ways and making sure that they know how to access those. So I just wanted to highlight that, as well as we're talking about burnout, is that I do truly believe that burnout is 100% preventable in so many ways if organizations and teams learn to look out for the signs in individuals before it gets to a point where it becomes dangerous. So I want to make space for Winston.
Yeah, no, I think the couple of things that came to mind when I was thinking about my own previous career and how burnout played a part in that was, and you've touched on it already, I think the idea of line managers not being equipped to support team members with burnout, because I remember situations that I was in, or, my colleagues were in, and, I guess it would kind of be reduced to a lack of performance, or it'll be reduced to, this person isn't just suited for a particular project, when actually it was something deeper, something more underlying that needed to be investigated and addressed at the root. And then also thinking, from, I guess, a team member perspective, and again, just the self-awareness to know that this is burnout that I'm feeling, and B, knowing what resources are available, which is something that we touched on, whether it's accommodations, whether it's, flexible working, how can I address all of this stuff that I'm feeling? Because sometimes it's super hard to put your finger on it in the moment.
Of course, absolutely. And I think it's well, we're all human, right? Like even the organization at HR level and managers, we're all human. And it is, I think it's we all need to take accountability, of course, but for employees to feel safe to do so, that obviously has to come at an organizational level. There has to be this culture of, you are safe, we're here to listen, and we will build that trust by actually taking what you're telling us, what you're opening up about, and then putting things into place, because that's how trust is built. And then you can put the things into action. And that also goes, of course, accessibility, but also neurodiversity, a lot of important things where it's just lack of education and knowledge sometimes. And then it's scary, isn't it? Or as human beings, we don't like things we're not in control of, or when things are uncertain, like we'd rather not touch that. So, but that's exactly what you need to touch, especially at that kind of level. And you need to kind of make sure that you embed those policies, those educational training that is necessary for people in certain situations to be more supportive, to be able to make arrangements necessary to support individuals. Because again, that we were saying earlier, those niggling parts will then, of course, not add up and lead to even worse things. And then the individual also more empowered to do what they can do on their level, to the things that they can control, to kind of take self-care and all the other things that can of course also prevent going to burnout. So I guess it's also really important, and I don't know whether you'd agree, but that at executive level or senior leadership level, that you promote well-being whilst also fulfilling, of course, the demanding executive roles. But you need to set the tone right for an open and honest conversation, and you need to also role model these things at that level. And that's something that's very new, isn't it, to us as people? We're so like labor, we need to work. So it's something that I guess we just need to change some of the stigma around it, some of the ways maybe we have done it wrong in the past, and really empower, I guess, also leaders and managers to do to be empowered to have that work-life balance, for example, and lead by example. Sorry, Chris, you go ahead.
No, it's okay. I mean, you're saying really great stuff. I mean, I like to always come down to the practical level. So like, how do you start to build that trust as a leader? And I like to think of some really concrete ways that I've encouraged organizations to do this. And one of those is pretty simple. In corporate, we love these meetings. We love to have these long meetings to go over these agendas. And then we always don't have enough time to connect. And I say, reduce the meeting time. Bring it from a 60-minute meeting to a 50-minute meeting. Better yet, bring it from a 30-minute meeting to a 25-minute meeting, and use some of that time for intentional connection. Or also just to give people time to do things that are human oriented, like using the restroom, or to get from one meeting to the other without feeling like increasingly stressed because they have to run to get there. And then encouraging connection and structuring it into the meetings so that people who are having trouble with connecting or are different places in the life cycle have opportunities to connect in new ways. And it's a part of the way that we operate as an organization. Like, we value connection, we value vulnerability. Like, it has to be built in to the environment so that people can feel like it's not just a one-time thing, or it's something that they have to like show up and be vulnerable in this one space and be uncomfortable. Like, that's not how you build trust. Like, it has to be built over time. But if it's built in regularly, then it will happen. Like, how do you think about well-being and mental health as a part of feedback? Like, how do you encourage not only leaders but team members to be a part of the feedback process and like check in on one another and check in on how folks are doing, like in ways that don't feel invasive, but also feel like, hey, like people care about me. Like, and I don't have to share everything that's going on in my life, but something's going on, and I think my team will rally about me if I find a way to share that in some way, shape, or form. Like, there has to be more ways to do that. That feels like there are a lot of different opportunities for people to do that in ways that they can feel safe.
No, it's so true. I love everything you said there. And I think, Winston, you're nodding your head as well. Like, do you, like, from your experience, would you say there are things that were done really badly or things that were good, like similar to the practical things, tips that Chris has shared that you kind of would like to add?
Yeah, I mean, all of those. And also, when I think back to the situations and the team environments that I've been in, where I really felt seen and valued as a team member, and I also know this from, working with groups and companies and, members of staff in different places, it typically boils down to some of the more simple things. And we've touched on a bunch of them already, but I remember, especially for me, from a leader's perspective, like when a leader genuinely takes an interest in me, that does something for me in a way that I can't explain. And it could be something as simple as, some leaders don't even know the names of all the members of their team, right? And that seems like maybe a surprising thing, but it's something that I've come across in my experience. And not just knowing their names, but actually taking the time to learn something about them so that you can actually check in in a more meaningful way. And, I think the other thing, and again, this is maybe from a leader's perspective, is leaders also sharing, their own journey, maybe the things that they're working on, the things that they find a little bit hard. I think that also creates a space where people acknowledge that, hey, we're all a work in progress, and it's okay to say that I'm working on X, Y, Z, and kind of go into that feedback, how we can incorporate accessibility into feedback that Chris was mentioning. When leaders lead on that front, it again creates this safe space where people are like, if the CEO is working on, X, Y, and Z, then maybe it's okay for me to say that I'm working on this other thing too. And then that creates a space where more genuine, authentic sharing is happening and people are connecting in a more meaningful way than X's and O's.
Beautiful. I love it. That's literally it shouldn't be a dream, but that's a perfect scenario. You really want that, but why it shouldn't be so difficult, because we're all human. So really that's where it starts, isn't it? It's so the element of safety and trust again, you really build that.
Can
Thank
I
you so
also
much.
add to what Winston's saying about leaders connecting with folks? I feel like it's also a lot of times I work with different leaders and they're quick to be able to say, we have an employee assistance program that can do this work. But they don't know how to find it. They don't know what happens when you call the EAP or whatever resource. Like, they know nothing about it to be able to talk to people about it and actually tell people, oh, like either I've used this one time, or I just called to find out how it works. And this is how it works for you, so that I've reduced one of those additional barriers for you. I find that more often than not, we provide a lot of benefits and resources in support of mental health or well-being, but we have no idea how they work or how to give access to them. And I think that's a huge red flag in a way, because how am I supposed to trust as an employee that these things are in support when none of my leaders are admitting to using them, or that they even know what will happen when I do? So I see here in the chat, it says they've tried multiple times to use the EAP benefit, but they can't even take advantage of it. I find that so often as well when I work with EAPs, is that you call in, you can't get what you need, and then you're asked out, right? So we have to find ways to eliminate those barriers for people so they know what to look for, or they know, like, oh, it takes 3 days for them to call back, or whatever the case may be.
Definitely. So just to kind of, I guess, take away from that tick box mentality as well, right? We're just ticking a box here, and you want the people to care. And I think it's something you said earlier as well, Winston. It's about really that genuine connection, genuine care, and not just thinking that somebody's just doing something else, basically shipping you away because, they just don't know what to do. And I think that's really, really important. So yeah, thanks, Chris. I really appreciate that as well. That's so true. But actually talking about that and the tick box exercise brings me to and obviously your background in law and everything, Chris. I would really love to hear, workplace well-being in the law sector. A lot of stereotypes, but is there something you can share a little bit about your experience there and your knowledge around?
Sure. I mean, I think it's growing. The legal industry is really a budding conversation for well-being, and there's so many intrinsic barriers to creating environments that are whole, right? They're environments that are supposed to be around perfection in a lot of ways, because you're doing really hard work with external clients. There's the billable hour, which creates a huge barrier to well-being. And we're trying to figure out, how do you navigate around these things, but also just how can you shift the industry? And the first start is these conversations around stigma and language. And so it's really at the core, that's what we're doing, is beginning to move the needle in little ways. I was even speaking to a colleague earlier today who talked about, at their firm, just having leaders come forward and talk about their mental health journeys or things that they've experienced. So it's just shifting the narrative in these small, actually big ways. They're not small ways, and big ways, so that people can feel more comfortable. And then over time, we're creating the shift towards, like, well, let's talk about the billable hour. In what ways has that served us in the past? And what ways is it not going to continue to serve the humanity of our people moving forward as an industry. And I don't have the answers to those questions, but it is something that we're working on.
Yeah.
In terms of connection, which is what we were talking about before, I can talk about my firm. One of the things that we're really focused on right now is encouraging people to find new ways to connect. And we have a program that we call Project Connect, which is about people coming together in small groups, 3 to 5 people. It's a safe space. We had a thing in the chat earlier where someone was saying that they agree with me about wanting to express themselves, but what happens when people repeat what you say or use it against you? And I think that's huge. I think that's a really big deal. Like, that's not a psychologically safe space. So we are teaching how to create psychologically safe spaces in small environments that we can then model into bigger environments, or, expand out into the rest of the firm. So in these small spaces, we talk about, what's your favorite meme? Like, what do you do for fun? And the only rule is you cannot talk about work. And so you have to build authentic relationships in these spaces. Or there's 2 rules. You can't talk about work, and you also have to, whatever is said there stays there. And it has worked really well. And when I started this program, I was told over and over it would never work. People are not going to come to this program. No one's going to want to open up or talk about themselves. And let me tell you, this program has grown exponentially every single year. There's a wait list for it because people do want that. People want to connect with people at work. I mean, the loneliness epidemic is real, and where people are spending the most of their time is in the workplace. So it is important for us to use this space very intentionally. The other thing I wanted to share really quickly, if I can remember what it was that, modeling is so important. Right. And I try to find different ways in my firm to model good behavior. I mean, vulnerability in different ways. So like showcasing myself in different ways so that people can see what it looks like. But also, like, I've reframed. So we have a mental health and wellness committee. And when I started at the firm, mental health and wellness committee was only comprised basically of partners and senior HR professionals. What I did was shift that paradigm so that we also included other stakeholders, which we started talking about earlier in this call, about including diverse voices at the table. So making sure that there are people that represent a lot of different aspects of the institution from all the different components of the institution at the table, so that when we are making decisions about well-being, it doesn't get clouded by one lens. Because even myself, as a diversity, inclusion, and well-being expert, can get clouded by a lens. I cannot see it all.
It's a human
So
thing. Yeah.
we need to have people at the table to be able to bring up different ideas. And also, we've thought very differently about how we structure those meetings. So we do connect at the beginning of every meeting. We do try to end with some form of connection. And what happens in those spaces when you do that is that there's a shift. So people come from, who knows what case they just came from, right? That, and how activated they are in their bodies when they come to this meeting. But when we've taken the first 5 minutes to do that shift, you literally see people change.
Yeah.
You see the behavior, you see the body relax, and they come into their own. So then we can have a very productive conversation about whatever agenda items we have for that day. So those are the 2 really big things that we've taken. And the other thing that I've really pushed at the firm is learning how to take space and make space. And I bring that up very often, all the time, so that people, because we know that especially lawyers, they like talking, they like taking up a lot of space. But how do you make sure that you are regulating yourself so that you're bringing other people to the table? And all of these different components come together to make more of a psychologically safe environment. And it's not going to happen in a day. It's not going to happen in 2 days. It's going to happen culturally over time as it continues to emulate. So the next week, we'll be having a talk about, like, what does it mean to be a caregiver in the legal industry? Like, because I mean, I'm in the sandwich population, you know, caregiving up and caregiving down. So like, how do you think about that in mental health? Anyway, I've been talking a long time. So
no, it's you know, the initiatives, they're just amazing, Chris. So thank you so much for sharing. I think that really is, that triggers people's thoughts, and there are different things you can do that make such a difference, because we do spend so much time at work, you know, out of our lives. So it is important to make it a place where you have relationships, where you feel like you belong. So those things are so important. And Unmind, actually, we partner with 6 US law firms to explore well-being within the legal sector. And it was quite shocking, some of the findings, but it was so important. There was like 1 in 2 employees in our sample, they took at least 1 day off due to mental health difficulties within the previous quarter. Or, the firms were losing nearly 10% of their annual staffing costs through mental health related absence and presenteeism and attrition. So, and there was even a third of our participants, they told us that senior leaders in their firms didn't seem committed to supporting employee mental health. So it is so important, this role modeling element, this building the safe conversation and changing the communication, the culture around those. So we will continue to obviously gather data like this, and I hope Lizzie will share I think that she will share it at the end as well, for people who want to read a little bit more about it. But there is really a shared value in knowing that they are not, that individuals not alone, the employees doesn't feel alone, they feel like they belong, and that relieves so much stress, and that is also, you need to do that to make a difference. And I would love to ask Vincent your thoughts on, the importance of allyship, really.
Yeah, I mean, I love the question on allyship because sometimes I feel like I have a love-hate relationship with allyship, because it's become a bit of a buzzword. I mean, certainly in the DI space, it's something that you hear a lot, but not necessarily see it in action as we would love to see it. And I think for me, I like the idea of allyship when it comes to mental health specifically, because I think that's super transferable, and it can look like many different things. And some of the practical ways could even involve looking at your product offering or your services, or even the content that you deliver, and kind of taking a introspective look as to, is this stuff actually representative of my clients or even the communities that you serve, and not just demographically, but also from a values perspective. So, I guess I know a bit about content. So for example, when I think about, content creation, or, even stuff that we all watch on TV, Netflix, whatever, I'm sure everyone can point to an example where you've seen something that's loaded with stereotypes, that's loaded with, different negative perceptions about communities who are already marginalized, right? And so it's thinking, as a content creator or as a media company in this instance, how can we bring the right people around the table, to Chris's point earlier, so that we make sure that we're catching these unhelpful things earlier in production before they make it out to, to the general public. So I think for me, allyship, a big part of it is reviewing the work that we're doing and making sure that it's in alignment with our values and also with the values of the people that we're serving.
Beautiful. Good. Yeah. It's a difficult topic, isn't it? But I think the way you said it is really wonderful. And I know, Chris, you're itching to say something. I can see it on your face.
No, I just wanted to follow up with what Winston was saying about, I totally agree that allyship is more than just calling yourself an ally, but it's learning the tools, it's learning the resources. It's, if you are in administration, it's doing exactly what Winston was saying about, like, when you're working with vendors or future partners that you're going to work with for benefits, like, have you asked them what their stands are on DEI and how do they emulate that in their own culture, their own work culture, and on their apps or whatever the case may be? Like, is their material, their content culturally humble? Do they provide mental health content in language? That's one that always comes up for me, because I'm like, mental health is such a personal topic. Like, there has to be opportunities for people to engage with it in a language that is meaningful to them, and that it is reflective of the way that they understand it, because language and culture are so entwined. And just thinking about representation as well. And like, I find more often than not in a lot of different mental health and well-being apps or speakers, like the panels aren't diverse. There's often a lot of ableism and ableist language that's reflected in the materials, and also like their content in general. So like, if I'm an ally, I want to think carefully as a member of an HR team, or just someone who's doing this kind of work and bringing resources to an organization, that I'm thinking carefully about that, and also asking them about how they're able to tailor to specific populations within where I work, so that we can offer the most relevant and evidence-based resources possible to the populations. And I think that is allyship. So thank you, Winston, for that.
Yeah, thank you both. That's so powerful. And I feel like there was a lot of great insights in there that people can really take away here today. And I'm conscious of the time, but I would really love to know, Winston, if you could just tell me a little bit on what do you do within companies to influence cultural change, to actually support all of that as well.
Yeah, I mean, a big part of it we've covered already with the psychological safety. And I guess, also with psychological safety, what I see is sometimes almost a binary view. And I guess this applies to DEI in general. So a lot of people like to think of DEI as, there's people that do DEI really well and others who don't. But I think a big part of it is kind of stepping away from that binary thinking and understanding that we're all on a journey, whether it is DEI or whether it is psychological safety, and actually committing to that journey, like, is a big part of it. And so, with that journey comes things like empathy, comes things like, respect, education, kindness, all things that we've touched about already. And I guess on the flip side, I've seen when it doesn't work so well, and especially when I think about the other thing that I do on social media as a content creator and YouTuber, I've seen how maybe a lack of those ingredients, that empathy can turn into, abuse or discrimination simply because someone didn't take a second to educate themselves before, dropping a comment or saying something on social media, purely on someone's appearance or a lack of understanding because somebody looks or thinks a little bit different to how they do. So yeah, I think it's just those good human being values that we all know. We don't need to be the experts for that. And then also just committing to that journey and committing to that education so that I can immerse myself in a community that I might not resonate with because it's not my community, but I want to learn about it.
Okay, and that's the only way we can also break down biases, right? Just having these just open conversation, listening to each other, getting to know each other, right? Like, I love what you said. Thank you so much. And before we kind of open up the floor I can see the questions coming in. There's so many really great questions, and I want to give them as much time as we can. I think it would just be lovely to have maybe a brief kind of final remarks from both of you as well. And I just briefly want to say that I think it's important to strike this balance between achieving results and prioritizing employee well-being within an organization, and recognize the fact that these aspects are very much interconnected, and organizations have to integrate both by creating a supportive culture, implementing well-being policy, and also valuing employee input. So equally important to consider, of course, that this is a process and we are all talking about human beings. I think you said that earlier, Chris, as well. Like, we all have different circumstances, the unique circumstance of each organization as well. So it's important to keep that in mind and make knowledge available, education available, and tools that we can apply to these different settings, and realize that it will take time. And if you guys want to just add your thoughts as well, really appreciate it, and then we can open the floor to the audience.
Yeah, I can share. So I guess as a final thought, I think maybe just to take it back to the theme about mental health as a human right, because yeah, I guess first of all, just surprised that this is something that we don't talk about as often, which is why I'm super grateful that we have this space today to kind of dive into that, because, mental health impacts how we show up in all areas of life, and a lack of support or a lack of the right care in that respect, excludes a lot of people. I think I read that 1 in 8 people are living with some kind of mental health condition. So that's a big part of the population just to dismiss. So it feels like it's something that I want to commit to, and I hope that everyone, by being on the call, is saying that they want to commit to it too.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Winston. I think for me, I don't have much to conclude except that even just by showing up today, like we already know that you all are mental health allies, that you're thinking about this, and that you're already doing the work in some way, shape, or form. And so we're grateful for you. Continue doing that work, continue championing this cause, because every day there's going to be incremental change towards where we're trying to go and tackling stigma and making the change that we want to see in this world. And yes, mental health is a human right. But human rights work takes a long time. So keep fighting the good fight, and we're here for support. Reach out if you need to think about something or ask questions about something more that's happening in your organization. We want to be here to support you. So I do. I don't know about the rest of them, but thank you.
We all do. I love that. Oh, thank you both so much. Honestly, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I feel like a lot of people will really leave this call inspired. I definitely am. So, and there's so much work that we can still do. So before we take any questions, I've just shared a QR code. Please feel free to scan this. This is just on the topic of allyship. That we all need kind of these well-being champions at work that really do care about what we have to say, where we feel safe to kind of explore different options and things within the workplace. So Unmind is offering this wonderful well-being champion training to the world. It's completely free until the end of 2023. So go check it out by scanning and sharing the code. And if we have any Unmind customers on the call as well, please have a look at relevant courses surrounding this conversation around better communication, supporting others, growing gratitude, getting the right language around mental health, tackling stigma. There's loads of lovely courses that really resonate with these topics. So if you want to start or continue these conversations, please do check those out. And there's a few questions now before we kind of go away, and just trying to find them quickly. I think there was a question to both of you on what you love to do the most to support your own mental health.
Best question ever. What do I love to do to support my mental health? I love to go salsa dancing. I can just lose myself in the music, in the rhythm, in the vibes. So I love that. And I swim twice a week. So those are the ways I'm doing right now.
I love that. I think for me, 2 things come to mind. One is playing with my 1-year-old daughter. That's always super fun as a way of, selfishly, giving myself a bit of a self-care break. The other thing, which might be a bit weird, is getting a haircut. There's something about getting a haircut that is massively self-caring for me.
I love that. It's very important. Self-care, we minimize it, but that's where it all starts.
Hey, Katie, you don't get to escape. What do you do?
Well, I don't want to jump on like a boring bandwagon, but I definitely love my swimming. And I think my 3 children are the source of my happiness, but also drive me crazy, but they certainly keep me on my toes. And they're just a beautiful reminder of just, taking the moment and the present, and not to worry too much about the things that have already happened or the things in the future. So I guess that's definitely always fills up my cup. Thanks, Chris. There was one more question I thought was quite good actually to get your insights on. It says, I ask my employees, what can I do to help? But they often don't answer anything specific. Are there better questions I can ask? And how can I best support people around me without it affecting my own mental health? So let's just go with the first one first. Are there better ways of asking those questions and having those conversations? Can
you actually repeat the question? Because I missed the first part.
So what can I do to help? That's what they would ask. And then often, there wouldn't be much of an answer coming back. So they're saying, are there better ways to ask my employees how I can help them?
That's always a good question. I always like to ask, how do you need support? Like, what does support look like for you? Because it changes the paradigm of the question of just like, what can you do, but more of like, what do they need? And that may or may not include you. And that's all right too. So I would ask that. And how are you really is always great. Because people never answer, how are you? Well, right? I'm good, I'm fine, but how are you really? And what does support look like for you?
I love that. That genuine interest makes such a difference, doesn't it? Yeah. Thanks, Chris. What about you, Winston? What would you say?
Yeah, I think in addition to those, one thing that I found works well is kind of asking, I guess, a bit of a balanced question. So something like, what's something challenging that you're working on, and also what's something exciting that you're working on. And then I think for some people that kind of feels a bit more disarming than having to share just the hard stuff, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I hope that answered your question as well. I think it's really great. And it's just that human connection, right? I'm not just doing that tick boxing exercise. I'm actually interested in you. So tell me about the good stuff. Maybe it's easier to start that conversation. Definitely, Vincent. Thank you. I know there's loads of other questions. The only other one I can see at the moment is how can I best support people around me without it affecting my own mental health? I would say to that, you have to start with yourself, right? I think that being empathetic is a blessing and a curse. So the more empathetic you are, sometimes you take it on other people's stress. So you have to look after yourself, and that's the only thing that's in your space of control. So the things that you can control is like making sure you have a self-care routine. And I'm sure you two have other things to add as well, but I have to put my psychology pens in there.
That's what I was going to say too, but also really learning about boundaries. Like, it's okay to support people and also to say, I don't have capacity for this at this moment. Here are the resources that I can available for, learn to do soft handoffs, and just really regulating yourself, which is the one thing, like Katie said, is that's in your control.
Yeah, I think for me, I've got something which I try to use. It's called my When Life Works list. And so that's got the things which I know fill me up. And so I try to kind of just have a look at that list every morning and try to do as many of those things, before I start my day. So that typically kind of creates a foundation for me where I can be a little bit more resilient because I've topped up my self-care tank already.
Can I add one more thing that just brought that to me? Along with that, I love that idea of, what did you call it?
When Life Works.
When life works. That's beautiful. I really like that. I would just add, be mindful of what your burnout symptoms are, right? What are the symptoms of that you're already experiencing stress and you're not navigating your stress control, your stress fight and flight, like in a good way, and let other people know about that too. Like, you don't have to do things alone, right? This whole call is about figuring out community and allyship and all of that stuff. So know what those things are. For me, it's when I start getting headaches on a regular basis, I might not even recognize it because I'm just like, work is hard, I have a headache, right? But if I tell other people so that they can say like, oh, I've heard you say that you've had a headache a few times recently, and I can be like, oh, okay, maybe I need to do my self-care routines, or I need to reevaluate, or whatever the case may be, because maybe I'm doing a lot more holding emotional space for people, or just really busy at work, whatever the case may be. So just knowing what your symptoms are.
Oh, it's wonderful. I could talk to you guys forever, but it is unfortunately time. But thank you so, so much for all your valuable insight. I think in closing, just want to say that change is a gradual process. We are all human beings, and I think it's just important to always approach us as that. We never know what the circumstance of people are, what is going on in their lives. I love some of the practical things we talked about. So hopefully, with giving ourselves the time that we can put these things into place, we'll get there. And it's just crucial to remember that mental health is a human right, and we must uphold it for everyone because we are all human. So I really hope you enjoyed this webinar today. I certainly did. And massive thanks to everyone for joining, taking this time. You already started something, you're making a difference. And to our fantastic panel, of course, both of you, Winston and Chris, for your time and your valuable insights. Truly appreciate it. Hope everybody enjoys the rest of the day and keep on talking about this beyond today. Take care.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.